Rashi, in the beginning of Parashat Yitro, notes that Yitro had a number of different names. Yitro, Sheva Shemot Nikru'ulo, he had 7 different names. Ruel, Yeter, Yitro, Chovav, Chever, Keni, Putiel. And in fact, when we look at, when we first meet Yitro, in the beginning of Parashat Shemot, Uloken Midyan Sheva Banot, Vatavo Vatidlena, and then it says, Vatavona El Ru'uel Avihem. So the father of these girls is called Ru'uel. Later on, it says, Moshe Aroet Son Yitro Chotno. He was a shepherd for the flock of Yitro, his father-in-law. And later on, after the sneh, it says Vayelech Moshe Vayashev El Yeter Chotno, and it calls him Yeter instead of Yitro. And in the same pasuk, it says Vayomer Lo Elchana V'ashuva El Achai Asher Mitzrayim. I'll go return to my brothers in Mitzrayim. Ver'eb Haudam Chayim. I'll see if they're still alive. Vayomer Yitro LeMoshe Lech LeShalom. So in the psukim that precede our Parashat Yitro, he's called Ru'uel, he's called Yeter, and he's called Yitro. Our Parasha, of course, only gives one name. It calls him Yitro throughout. But when we look at the Parasha, the titles change. It says, Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan Choten Moshe. Yitro is his name. Kohen Midyan is one title. He is the priest of Midyan, and he's the father-in-law of Moshe. And then the Parasha continues, and it doesn't mention Yitro, but it keeps talking about the various different titles. Vayikach Yitro Choten Moshe. Vayavo Yitro Choten Moshe. Vayomer Moshe Ani Chotencha Yitro. I'm your father-in-law Yitro. Vayetze Moshe lekrat Chotno. He goes to meet his father-in-law. Vayisafer Moshe lechotno. And he tells him about all the wonderful things that happen. And then it says Vayichad. It doesn't say Choten Moshe. It says Vayichad Yitro. Al kol hatovah she'asa Shem Yisrael. Vayomer Yitro. Not Choten Moshe. Yitro. Baruch Hashem asher atzil etchem yam Mitzrayim. And then it says, Vayikach Yitro Choten Moshe Olav Zvachim. He brought sacrifices to sacrifice to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it calls him again Yitro Choten Moshe. And then it says, Vayavo Aaron V'chol Zeknei Yisrael L'chol Lechem Im Choten Moshe Lifnei Elokim, and it calls him Choten Moshe, and it leaves out the word Yitro. So there's a play regarding the various different titles. Is he noted as Yitro? Is he noted as Choten Moshe? And it keeps switching back and forth. In the second half of the parsha, it talks about the Sarei Alafim Sarei Meot. When he comes and he sees that Moshe, there the term is only Chotno, Choten Moshe, or Chotno. It mentions only Yitro as a father-in-law. Yitro, his name is not mentioned even once. So we have to understand what exactly is the significance of when he's called Yitro, when he's called Choten Moshe, and when is he called both. In my opinion, Yitro refers to the person, the Dmut, himself, who he is. And who he is somebody who dedicated his life to understanding God. He's a Kohen of Midyan, and as a religious figure who's sensitive religiously, he's called Yitro. Choten Moshe talks about his specific relationship with Moshe Rabbeinu, being the father of Tzipora, who's the wife of Moshe, and regarding that, he's called Choten Moshe. So when he first comes, who hears this wonderful message? Not only Choten Moshe, but also Yitro Kohen Midyan. Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan, Choten Moshe, et kol she'asa Elokim leMoshe u'Yisrael. So first of all, it talks about what happened to his son-in-law. Second of all, it also talks about what happened to Israel, and therefore it refers to him as Yitro Choten Moshe, Yitro Kohen Midyan, Choten Moshe. Later, when he comes to Machane Israel, he wants to be invited in. He's called, again, Yitro Choten Moshe, and he comes to arrive at the camp, and then he tells, in order to get in, he says, Ani chotencha, I'm your father-in-law, and therefore he'll be invited in, not because he's a great religious figure, but because he has a family relationship with Moshe. And then Moshe tells his father-in-law about all the wonderful things, and it's a conversation between a son-in-law and a father-in-law, but the reaction is of Yitro, the Kohen Midyan. When he hears about the things that happened, Vayichad Yitro al kol hatovah she'asa Shem Yisrael, and Moshe is not mentioned, but he talks about the great religious Yeshua that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved Israel, and Moshe is no longer relevant because we're talking about Yitro, and he's overwhelmed by the religious reaction. Vayomer Yitro Baruch Hashem, Asher Yitziel Etchem Yam Mitzrayim Yad Paro. He talks about, he gives a bracha to Hashem. Who gives the bracha? Yitro, Kohen Midyan, not Choten Moshe, but Kohen Midyan. And then Vayikach Yitro, Choten Moshe, Ola Uzvachim. Yitro, who also happens to be the father of Moshe, brings the sacrifices. But when Aaron and Ziknei Yisrael come to join them, they join him not as Yitro. They have no appreciation for Yitro Kohen Moshe. They come to Lechol Lechem im Choten Moshe Lefnei Elokim and not Yitro. So you see that there's this play of Yitro and Choten Moshe throughout the parsha, and one has to try to decipher exactly when one is used and when is the other is used. When it comes to his advice to Moshe regarding the Sarei Alafim Sarei Meot, it's not Yitro Kohen Midyan, but it's a person looking from the side who's concerned with his son-in-law and a father-in-law giving advice, and therefore only Choten Moshe is mentioned from that point on. But I want to focus on the beginning of the parasha because there's something which is very, very interesting and also perhaps surprising. Vayikach Yitro Choten Moshe et Tzipora, Eshet Moshe achar shiluchea v'et shnei banea. He comes with Moshe's wife, he comes with Moses' children. Vayavo Yitro Choten Moshe uvanav v'ishto Moshe el midbar. Vayomer el Moshe, Ani chotencha Yitro ba elecha. I, your father-in-law, have come to you. V'ishtecha, and your wife, u'shnei banecha ima. Your wife and her children are here. Rashi comments, Ani chotencha Yitro, im ena tiyotze begini. If you don't come because of me, so your wife is here. And if you don't come for your wife, your children are here. In other words, there's too much speaking over here. Why is Yitro so reluctant? Why does he feel that perhaps he won't be invited in? Why does he have to say, Ani, this declaration, Ani chotencha Yitro ba'elecha, your wife is here, your children are here, and somehow therefore he'll be able to be invited into Machne Yisrael. And I think that the answer, or to discuss the answer, I want to talk about a different pasuk that begins at the beginning of Yitro, which refers to the two names of the children of Yitro. I was a foreigner in a foreign land. And then the name of the second one was Eliezer, Ki Elokei Avi Be'ezri V'Yitzilei Mecher Paro. The God of my fathers, my ancestors, was with me, and therefore I was saved from the sword of Paro. And I want to ask an illegitimate question. At first glance, the names are out of order. First God saved me from Paro, and then I became a foreigner in a foreign land. Of course, that's not a question. You don't have to give names to your children in chronological order, but it's an interesting point. But I think what's more important is that the entire perspective of Moshe changes from the name of the first child to the name of the second child. And the question is exactly what created that change. So at first he sees himself as a fugitive. The Torah says, Vayol Moshe l'shevet et ish. He gave a shvuah that he will remain with Yitro, Reuel, whoever it is, he will remain with him. And based on that shvuah, he marries the daughter. And he doesn't think that there's any possibility that he's going to go back to his brethren in Mitzrayim. He feels that he's going to stay forever. He was chased away, he ran away, he's a fugitive, he's alone, he's ger hayiti be'eretz nachriya. That's his state of mind. That's how he views what happened to him. He sees himself as being merely a fugitive who's alone, who's a foreigner, who was adopted by Kohen Midyan. But the second name, Kelokei Avi Ve'ezri Ba'yitzei Mecher Paro, takes a look at all those events, and there's a different view of them retrospectively. What happened originally was not simply that I became a fugitive and I ran away, but that God was there helping me. And this idea of Elokei Avi Be'ezri, at what point did this switch happen? It happened at the snare. When we look at the snare, so that's what it says, Vayoma Anochi Elokei Avicha, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. Elokei Avi Be'ezri is all of a sudden at the snare. When he has that vision, he says, you have been chosen to save your people. At that point, he looked retrospectively at all that had happened. at the fact that he was brought up in the house of Paro, the fact that he had to run away, and the fact that now he was chosen and he saw this unbelievable vision and he got the prophecy from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to go back and to save the people, he was able to view everything that happened differently. He wasn't this lone fugitive who thinks that he'll never be able to get back, but all of a sudden he has a mission. And his mission is to go back to Mitzrayim to save the people. He doesn't tell when he goes back to Yitro and gets permission to go to Mitzrayim, he just says, I want to see if they're still alive. But the truth is, his whole mission in life has changed. And he goes back, and there are the Eser Makos, he's a divine leader, Kriyas Yam Suf, Mitzrayim is destroyed, the people come out, and they're about to receive the Torah at Sinai. And the entire perspective of Moshe has changed. But also the perspective or relationship between Yisro and Moshe has changed as well. Yisro took a fugitive, an Egyptian fugitive off the streets, and he brought him into his house, and he made a shidduch with one of his daughters. But now it's Moshe who's the savior of Am Yisrael. Moshe is in a different place, and therefore the relationship between Yisro and Moshe is a different place as well. Moshe is the great redeemer who's been chosen by God. And he's not this poor Egyptian fugitive. So when after Yisro hears about all the wonderful things that have happened and all the great miracles, he's not so sure exactly what his relationship is with Moshe Rabbeinu. Ani chosencha ba'elecha. Your wife is here, your children are here. If you don't come, allow me in, at least allow your wife in. If you don't allow your wife in, at least allow your children in. But he's not sure. And then what the pasuk says is, Vayetze Moshe lekrat chodno. He leaves the machane and he greets his father-in-law. It doesn't mention his wife. It doesn't mention his children. Yisro himself is worthy of meeting. Vayishtachu vayishaklo vayishalu Israel l'shalom. And he greets him as a friend, as a brother. Moshe, anav mikol adam, has not changed, and he still, in his humility, still feels that he's not above anybody else, and he greets Chotein Moshe, Ish al Re'eu l'shalom.